What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another 3D model. This week, we're going to be making some diner table condiments. So let's just get right into it. Now to be honest, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to create for this week's video. I was in one of those weird moods where I wasn't really in the mood to model anything specific. Everything I looked at just didn't seem too interesting, so I decided to jump on Google and Pinterest and do some scrolling and look for something that I found somewhat interesting. And while scrolling through, I randomly came across this image of some table condiments. And I thought this would be a lot of fun. We haven't created a small asset in a few weeks now. The last few videos have been more environmental assets. So I thought it'd be fun and interesting to make some old diner condiments for this week's video. So this image is the image that we're gonna more or less try to recreate. And to make our lives easier, we're gonna use a few other images that I decided to grab, a few that we can just trace from, just to make this whole process a little bit quicker. I wanted this week's video to be a faster one. So I decided to grab this image as well, which is showing just a ketchup bottle, which we could just more or less use as an image plane to trace from, so we can quickly create this ketchup bottle as one of our models. I also found this one, which shows the rack, and this would just be easy to recreate. That way we don't have to guess how it looks underneath and how all these little metal pieces are put together. We can more or less just use this image to recreate the whole rack asset. And I thought it'd be also fun to create another jam rack on the side. Every time I go to one of these old diners or restaurants, there's one of these little jam racks that show all these stacked little pieces of jam, usually in a breakfast diner. But I thought this would be a lot of fun to add to it as well. So I jumped on Google and found this image, which we will use to create all of our little jam packets. Now there's not too much to explain for this one. It's pretty straightforward. We're just going to recreate this image and have some fun trying to create some sort of realistic diner table condiments. Now don't forget, you can find this full video, which includes the full UV mapping process, all in real time, which will be available on my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. And you can also find the working file, so if you want to see the 3D model, or you just want to see the Substance Painter file and see how I put all these textures together, all of that will be available on there, and it'll all be available in that link. Now one thing as well, since I wanted to create this model a little bit quicker than usual, I wanted to grab some other images that we can use to make our texture process a lot faster. Now we will go over this more in detail when the texturing part starts, but something I just wanted to bring up now, when it came up to all those little packets of sweeteners and the salt and pepper, as well as the whole menu, I just found a lot of those references on Google Images. That way we can just kind of stamp those onto our meshes and not really worry about creating these textures from scratch. I wanted to get this all done in more or less under an hour, so it really doesn't leave us a lot of time. We just need to get started and start blocking out all of these main shapes. So like I said, I decided to use that one image of the ketchup bottle that we can just drag in as an image plane. That way we can just trace this and we can use this as our main sort of reference when it comes to guessing proportions. That way I can just start building my rack based off of this ketchup bottle and all of our other condiments associated with it. It's hopefully going to help us speed up the process. You can obviously find other references online for image planes for all the other assets, but I'm just going to use this main ketchup bottle as my main reference for proportion, and we can build off of this for all the other assets in the scene. So let's just slowly start piecing this scene together, and let's create some diner table condiments. Alright, so before we jump into those UVs, I just quickly want to give a shout out to this week's video sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers a variety of services ranging from PCB production, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, 3D printing, and much more. You can quickly upload your own files and get a quote immediately, so if you're building something at home or want to print one of your own 3D models, PCBWay makes it extremely easy to get custom parts for your projects, even if you don't have the necessary tools. They take care of everything so you can get those parts shipped directly to your front door. So if you're working on a project or need 3D printing or any of these other services, make sure to check them out in the description below. And once again, thank you PCBWay for sponsoring this week's video. Alright, so here are the diner table condiments in its finished form. Now everything is the exact same, there's just one small detail that I decided to do, and this was more or less last minute when I was done all the texturing, and that was just change the levels of the salt and the pepper in my jars here. So originally everything was full, same with the sugar, and I just realized, not that it looked bad or anything, but I thought it'd be more fun and just interesting to the eye and more realistic to look at if there was like different levels in my salt and pepper as if they weren't full and they were used. So all I did for this one was just basically drag down my cylinder that I had here, and then using the soft select brush, I can just select one and just kind of like change the level or make it not so straight. That way it just looked like it was like, you know, the salt was kind of warped on the top. So it didn't look like a solid piece in there, and it looked like it was more or less realistic pepper and salt. And because it's behind glass, I didn't worry about making it too, you know, going too crazy with it. I just did it really quickly. But that's just the only difference I did. I did it with both the salt, and I did them at different levels. So the salt looked more used than the pepper. Once again, just hoping that it would make it look more realistic. I really didn't have to, but just one little detail. I also just adjusted the rotation of all these little jam packets. That way it just didn't look so perfectly symmetrical. And you know, everything in real life is not perfect, and especially these little jam packets, they wouldn't be perfectly stacked. So I decided to just misalign them to hopefully once again make it look a little bit more realistic. But other than that, everything is the exact same. So let's go over how I split this thing up. Don't forget, you can find the full process, the whole UV mapping process in that real-time video, which I will upload to my Patreon page, and you can find that in the link in the description below. So what I decided to do was split this thing up into 3 different groups for 3 different textures that I had applied. Of course, this isn't a game asset or anything, so I wasn't really sure about optimizing these assets, especially when it came to poly counts, also when it came to the amount of textures. So I thought 3 would be fitting for this scene. So the first one was just the menu. Let me pull up my UV editor here. You'll see I just decided to break the menu off into its own texture map just to make, basically for simplicity, to make my life easy. But the outside shell I made a lot bigger since you wouldn't see the inside shell since it's folded. So I didn't really worry about getting too much resolution or detail since you wouldn't see it. So I decided to basically enlarge this outside shell as big as I could just to take advantage of that UV space. This one's very straightforward, just the menu. The second texture is the rack. And I also added the salt and pepper in the jam since all these little metal pieces wouldn't take up too much space. As you can see, I didn't go too crazy or spend too much time trying to optimize my UV space here. There obviously is some wasted space, like these ones, for example, probably just could have been bigger just to take advantage of that empty space, but it is what it is. Basically, all these little metal pieces are all the metal bars here on the rack, and then I decided just to add the salt and pepper and all my separate jams. So I did split these up. These are all stacked the same jam piece since I'm gonna have 4 different ones. I was planning to originally have 4 different, but the texture I used online for the jam only showed 3, so I decided to use the 3. So I probably could have stacked 2 of these together that are showing these back ones since they're the exact same jam type. But to be honest with you, my original intention was to have 4 different types of jam. So anyways, these were all stacked and sharing the same UV space, and all the bottoms are of course sharing the same UV space since they're all just the same plain white color. And then the inside pieces, since I was planning to stamp on that image of salt and pepper that I found online rather than just recreating some sort of texture that looked like salt and pepper, I decided to use a photo from Google. So these inside shells I just put off to the side. That way I can just quickly trace or stamp on that texture, that detail onto this texture or this UV shell. And everything else is the exact same. These outside ones showing the glass didn't have to be so big, but it is what it is. And the bottoms of my jams, as you can see, they're just not important. So I just shrunk those down to give the priority to more important UV shells. And I probably could have done a better job straightening out some of these shells, as you can see, but I was just kind of rushing through and just wanted to finish this video as quickly as possible this weekend since it is a busy weekend like usual, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it. All right, the last group is everything else in the scene. So all the other condiments, obviously giving priority or to the more important shells. So for example, these ones are the 2 ketchup bottles. This one is the glass, and this one's going to be the sugar. Once again, I found just a photo for the sugar that I could just paste onto this UV shell. So I just put that as its own space. And then for these little sugar or sweetener packets, I just decided to stack these to share the same UV space since they're all repeating, they're all the exact same sweetener. So I just made them all share the same UV space. But this one's pretty straightforward. Once again, trying to take advantage of that UV space. There's no point wasting space to get the most resolution out of those materials, but that's basically how I set this diner condiments model up for texturing. So now I just need to apply a different texture or material to each of these groups, and we can export this thing, jump over to Substance Painter, and we can start the whole texturing process. All right, so now we can export that FBX file from Maya and we can load that into our Substance Painter project. Now, when it came to those textures, there are, like I said at the beginning of the video, I decided to cut a lot of corners to make the whole process a lot quicker. and also a lot easier. There's no point in recreating a lot of these textures since we can just reuse images from Google. So that's exactly what I did. I jumped on Google Images and found all of these different textures. I found one for the sweetener packet. I found a few that I recreated as well in Photoshop for my menu. And then I found some jam packets as well as my salt, pepper, and sugar. I also found a napkin sort of texture. Of course, we can recreate these in Substance Painter if we really wanted to, but like I said, I was trying to get this texturing process done as quick as I can, and I find rather than recreating them from scratch, you can just get really great results just by stamping on materials and textures from Google. So using all these different textures you'll see throughout this whole texturing process, I can just drag these in, set them as a texture, and then I can just basically stamp them right onto my mesh. Now, I'm not going to worry about getting everything perfect. In fact, to make this whole process quicker, like I usually do, we're just going to fill in these empty meshes with some sort of material. Then we can come back to it at the end and start tweaking some of those roughness values and adding some fill layers to add some more dirt and grunge to make it look a little bit more used. My plan wasn't to make this look completely abused. I wanted to look more realistic, like it's not really an old, dirty diner or anything like that. It was just going to be an old school diner, like these have been used, but like I said, they're not abused or anything. So it's going to be fairly clean. And we are going to use that main reference photo that I showed at the beginning of the video as our main reference. So when it comes to choosing colors and roughness values, we're going to use this photo as our main reference and more or less try to recreate it. We will get a little bit experimental along the way to change some things up depending on how I think it looks, but this is going to be our main goal. And don't forget, you can find this full texturing process in real time, which will be available on my Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below. All right, let's start filling in these meshes with materials, and let's slowly texture our diner table condiments. right, and that's basically everything. That is the full 3D modeling, UV mapping, and texturing process that I did to create these old diner table condiments. Don't forget, you can find the full real-time video on my Patreon page, as well as all the working files. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, you can find it all in the link in the description below. Actually, I had a lot of fun recreating this one. This one was a lot of fun to make, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. As always, I want to give a massive thank you to all my Patreons. I really can't thank you all enough for your continuous support. It goes such a long way in helping support my page. And if you're interested in joining my Patreon, I also have a lot of tutorial-based videos, as well as all my YouTube videos in real time are available on there, along with all the working files. So if you're interested in getting access to any of that, you can find it all there. Or if you just want to help support this page and support future videos, Patreon is by far the best way to do that. So thank you all for supporting my art and supporting my Patreon page. All right, that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will catch you all in the next one.